Now what we have here is just what we're going to do is take the toilet and we're going to remove this toilet and replace it with a new one. Before I do that, there's going to be water reservoir inside the bowl, and I want to get all that water out of there before I take this thing out. So I'm going to use a shop vac, vacuum out the water from the bowl, and I'm also going to vacuum out the water from the tank because there's going to be some reservoir left in there, and I want it out. I don't want it all over the floor. Okay, what I'm doing here is I'm going to show you from the finished wall. I have my tape measure butted up against the drywall, which is the finished wall in this bathroom per se. And I'm showing you the approximate or the exact location of the center of the flange or the center of the waistline, however you want to look at it. But what we have to do is we've got to make sure if we're installing a toilet, even if it's new construction, whatever the case may be, I've got to check my flange and make sure it's the proper distance away from the finished wall. If you're doing a rough-in, then from the face of the stud to the center of the flange should be 13 inches. We've talked a lot about, and in the field, it's 12, 12 and a half. Give yourself a little leeway and use 13 inches to the center of the flange. All plumbing measurements are center of pipe. So again, from finished wall to center of flange, 13 will work, or from face of stud to center of flange, 13 inches will work. So as I'm pointing out here, we are looking at the finished wall, which is drywall, which could be typical in a bathroom behind a toilet, to the center of the flange, where my finger is straight across, is 13 inches. I want to make sure my bolts will be securely snug inside my flange and will not pull out. If my orientation of my flange is wrong, the bolts could easily pull out and my toilet will never be secure. There's a little flared side to these fasten bolts for the toilet, and I need to make sure when my flange is fully secured to the floor that my bolts will not pull out easily. You can see there's a wide portion to the flange where I can fit the nuts in, and then there's a skinny portion. I want those bolts inside, fully seated in the skinny portion of the flange. 13 inches to the center of the flange. So what I'm looking at right now is I've got a piece of copper stubbed out, and I have a compression fitting, which was that was used. I've got my Teflon tape and my angle valve, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the ferrule with a ferrule removing tool so that I can put on a new ferrule and a new compression fitting. I'm going to place the wrench on there. I'm going to tighten the nut to the ferrule tool, and sometimes this process is difficult because that ferrule should be squashed around that copper pipe, and I'm going to have an indentation on the pipe after I take the ferrule off. I'm doing this demonstration so I can show you how this is done. So what I'm going to do is I'm almost there. I've got the ferrule removed now, and what I have to do is remove the nut from the tool so that I can get the ferrule and get it out. The ferrule cannot be reused, by the way. Cannot be. I'm going to have to take a crescent wrench and take two of them, actually hold the tool in place with my one-stop wrench, and then take the nut off so that I can get the ferrule out, because I'm going to just toss the ferrule. It's no good. It's been used once, can't use it again, need a new one. And the ferrule is really tight and it will not come out of the nut right now, so I'm going to have to get something to pry that out. I cannot reuse that piece of pipe. If I try and seat a ferrule on there again, it's going to leak, and that pipe is indented. There's a small portion of the pipe that's indented from the ferrule, so we will use a new ferrule, put it on, and put on a new compression fitting. You can see it will fit easily right now, and I'm going to cut right behind where the ferrule used to be with a 3-wheeled cutter. This is a 3-wheel cutter, so I got to make sure my pipe is in between my two wheels. It's got to be right in the middle of those two wheels. I'm going to get right behind where the ferrule was, and I'm going to softly get the cutting wheel placed up against the copper pipe. As I turn, what I'm going to do is each revolution, I'm going to tighten the wheel a little bit more. But you can see how my cutting wheel is right on and making contact with my copper line. Just gently, because I'm going to score the pipe every time. And I'm slowly cutting the copper pipe without damaging the diameter and the radius and the circumference of this pipe. I don't want any dents. It has to be a perfect circle when I am done. Take a emery cloth and clean that pipe off so you don't have any soot sitting between your pipe and your ferrule. We're going to use a 5/8 OD, 3/8 OD angle shutoff valve. Because in this case the pipe is coming through the wall, so therefore I have to turn a 90 and go up and supply water to my toilet tank. This is just a quarter turn shutoff valve. It just, if you turn it a quarter, perpendicular is off and parallel is on. So perpendicular is off and parallel is on. So that means the water's turned on right now. What I've done is I have metal threads on this shutoff valve, so in that case I don't have any rubber gaskets. I have a ferrule, so I don't have a rubber gasket. I need to apply Teflon tape to my threads. With this in mind, what I'm going to do is we're going to install this compression fitting. Compression fitting has a ferrule and it compresses around the pipe. Now the Teflon tape is used to gum up the threads so the water will not leak through the threads. I've placed my ferrule on, I've placed my nut on, and I have to make sure that I press my compression fitting fully onto the pipe. Hand tighten the nut at first. Okay, this top portion I don't need. It has a ferrule and another compression nut, but I don't need them because it's going to a supply line for the toilet. So I've got this hand tightened, and I'm going to use my one-stop wrench, because one side of the wrench will go onto the actual compression nut. Now I'm going to take the other side of my one-stop, put it in the top of the shutoff valve or compression fitting, hold the shutoff valve in place, and tighten the compression nut. And that nut, what it's doing is it is pressing the ferrule onto the pipe. We saw that earlier. If it's fully wrenched on there, it's very hard to get off. I'm holding the shutoff valve in place and I'm tightening the compression nut so that tightens, in turn, tightens the ferrule to the pipe. And you notice I'm using controlled turns. I'm not just slapping my wrench on there and going to town. I'm using controlled turns, making sure that my shutoff valve is fully upright and in a proper position, not sitting on the pipe crooked. Perpendicular is off and parallel is on. Right now I've got it turned off. So my supply line here, this is the supply line you can buy at your local hardware store. It's got a 3/8 compression, and this is a toilet supply line. You got to make sure you're buying the right one. As you can see, I'm showing you, there's a rubber gasket on the top that connects to the tank, and there's a rubber gasket on the bottom which connects to the actual compression fitting or the shutoff valve, the top side of the shutoff valve. Hand tighten first and then wrench tighten. And again, I'm going to use controlled turns. This has got a rubber gasket in the bottom side of that supply line. I don't need Teflon when I have a rubber gasket. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a crescent wrench and I'm going to tighten this nut on the supply line to the actual shutoff valve. And I'm using the other side of my one-stop wrench, which fits the 3/8 nut on one side of the shutoff valve.